The wrench slipped. Metal kissed metal in the belly of the USS Constellation, and somewhere in that cathedral of diesel and steel, a single drop of oil fell onto skin that had no business being here. Elise Ward did not flinch. She watched the black droplet trace a path down her wrist, past the delicate blue veins visible beneath flesh, so pale it seemed to glow against the grime of the engine room. Her fingers, long and tapered as a concert pianist's, continued their work on the circuit board with a precision that belonged in an operating theater, not a ship's mechanical bay. Around her, the engine room breathed its mechanical breath. Pipes groaned. Generators hummed their industrial lullabies. The air tasted of salt and petroleum and the accumulated sweat of 1,000 sailors who had passed through this space before her. None of them looked like this. Ward reached up to blow a loose curl of golden hair from her face, the strand catching briefly on the bridge of her nose before falling back across her cheekbone. The motion revealed what the dim lighting had partially concealed, a face that seemed designed for magazine covers rather than maintenance bays. High cheekbones dusted with a constellation of natural freckles, full lips pressed together in concentration, eyes the color of winter ice, pale blue and startlingly clear against the shadows. She was, by any objective measure, beautiful, and in this place, beauty was a liability. "You seeing this?" The voice came from the hatchway, low and amused and carrying the particular tone of men who believe themselves unobserved. Ward did not look up. She had heard them approach 30 seconds ago, had catalogued their footsteps, their breathing patterns, the subtle differences in their gaits that told her everything she needed to know. 2 men, both enlisted. One heavier, probably mid-30s, favoring his left leg slightly. The other is younger, faster, eager to impress. "Command's got us babysitting runway models now," the heavier one continued. Petty Officer Hendricks, Ward's memory supplied. Engineering Division, 12 years in service, divorced twice, gambling debts that exceeded his annual salary. "Heard she came in on transfer papers nobody can trace." The younger voice belonged to Briggs, a gunner's mate with a thick neck and thicker skull. "Bet she's somebody's niece, or somebody's very expensive mistake. Princess got lost on the way to the ball." Laughter, sharp and mean. Ward's hands never stopped moving. She disconnected the faulty relay she had been examining, turned it over to inspect the corroded contacts, and began the delicate process of cleaning and replacement. Her movements were economical, precise, the product of training that had nothing to do with engine maintenance and everything to do with survival. "Think she even knows which end of a screwdriver to hold?" More laughter. Ward permitted herself 1 breath. 2, 3, 4. The 4 count had saved her life more times than she could remember. In a basement in Karachi, where the only light came from the muzzle flashes of automatic weapons. In a frozen warehouse outside Minsk, where her fingers had been too numb to feel the trigger. In countless moments when the wrong twitch, the wrong word, the wrong breath could mean the difference between walking out and being carried out in pieces. It would keep her civil now. She completed the repair. The diagnostic panel on the wall flickered from angry red to satisfied green, and Ward allowed herself a small nod before rising to her feet. The motion was fluid, unhurried, and something about the way she moved made the laughter die in the throats of the men at the doorway. She turned to face them. "The screwdriver," she said, her voice low and carrying an accent that seemed to shift with each syllable, neither fully American nor identifiably foreign, "goes in the hand goes to the screw goes into the mechanism." She took 1 step forward. "Would you like me to demonstrate something smaller? Your assumptions, perhaps?" Hendricks blinked. His companion's mouth opened, closed, opened again like a fish discovering that water had suddenly become hostile. "Ma'am, we were just leaving," Ward finished for him. "Yes, I noticed." They left, but not quickly enough to hide the look that passed between them. The look that said they would remember this. The look that said the strange woman in the engine room had just made herself a target. Ward watched them go, then returned to her workstation. Her jaw had tightened imperceptibly, and somewhere beneath the composed exterior, something cold and patient stirred. She had expected resistance. She had prepared for dismissal. What she had not fully anticipated was how much the petty cruelties would sting, Even after all the years, all the missions, all the times she had been underestimated and emerged victorious. A photograph was tucked into the inner pocket of her coveralls, pressed against her heart like a secret. She did not need to look at it. She had memorized every detail years ago. 6 faces arranged in 2 rows, all of them wearing the easy grins of young people who believed themselves immortal. 5 of those faces now belonged to names carved in stone at Arlington. The 6th face belonged to the man she had come to find. Ward closed her eyes briefly, allowing the familiar grief to wash through her and recede. There would be time for mourning later. There would be time for everything later. Right now, there is only one mission. The morning shift change brought fresh eyes and stale attitudes. Ward had relocated to a secondary maintenance bay on the 3rd deck, her toolkit spread before her in precise formation. To a casual observer, she appeared completely absorbed in her work, a technical specialist doing technical things in a technical way. To anyone who looked closer, who paid attention to the economy of her movements or the way her gaze swept the room at irregular intervals, the truth might have been more apparent. She was hunting. The door opened at 09:15, exactly on schedule. Ward did not look up immediately. She had already identified the approaching footsteps, had been tracking them since they rounded the corner 40 feet away. 4 sets of boots, 3 standard military issues, worn but serviceable. 1 pair polished to a mirror shine that spoke of parade grounds and promotion ceremonies, and a man who believed that appearance was everything. She finished tightening a bolt, counting silently to 3, before raising her head with an expression of mild curiosity. Rear Admiral Vincent Reese stood in the doorway like a man surveying his kingdom. He was impressive in the way that certain men of a certain age could be impressive. Tall, broad-shouldered, his silver hair swept back from a face that had probably been handsome before decades of rich food and richer self-regard had softened its edges. His uniform strained slightly at the buttons, metals glinting under the fluorescent lights in rows that told a story of steady advancement through the ranks. Behind him, 2 aides flanked a junior lieutenant who looked deeply uncomfortable with whatever was about to happen. Reese's eyes found Ward, and something shifted in his expression. Interest, perhaps. The kind of interest a collector shows when confronted with an acquisition he did not order but finds intriguing nonetheless. "The transfer anomaly," he said, stepping into the room. His voice was rich, cultured, carrying the particular timbre of a man accustomed to being obeyed. "I've been hearing interesting things about you." Ward rose to her feet, the motion controlled and respectful without being subservient. "Admiral?" "Ward, isn't it?" He circled her workstation slowly, examining her tools, her components, her, with the same detached interest. "I've reviewed your file 3 times. Fascinating reading, really. Or, rather, fascinating in what it doesn't say. Sir, your transfer orders came through channels I've never seen before. Your service record is impeccable, but strangely thin. And your specialization codes don't match any standard classification I'm familiar with." He stopped directly in front of her, close enough that his cologne preceded him, a cloying wave of sandalwood and self-importance. "Care to explain?" Ward met his gaze steadily. "I was assigned through proper channels, Admiral. Everything in my file is accurate." "Proper channels?" Reese's smile did not reach his eyes. "Look at you, those cheekbones, that complexion. You look like you wandered off from a ballet performance somewhere." One of his aides snickered. "Or maybe," Reese continued, warming to his theme, "you're imported goods. Decorative, is that what this is? Someone's idea of a joke?" He leaned closer, and his voice dropped to something that was meant to sound conspiratorial, but only sounded cruel. "Send the Russian doll to play sailor?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop by several degrees. Ward's expression did not change, but something shifted behind her eyes. A door closing, a switch being flipped. The transformation was invisible to anyone who did not know what to look for, but the junior lieutenant at the door took an involuntary step backward. "I'm from Virginia, Admiral." "Virginia?" Reese laughed, looking to his entourage for support. They provided it, weak chuckles and nodded heads. "Sure you are. And I'm from the moon." He jabbed a finger toward her chest, stopping just short of contact. "What's your actual rank, sweetheart? And more importantly, who did you have to charm to get posted to my ship?" The silence stretched. Ward's gaze remained fixed on Reese's face, studying him the way an entomologist might study a particularly unpleasant specimen. When she spoke, her voice was quiet, almost gentle. "My rank, Admiral, is higher than yours." The laughter died as if someone had cut its throat. Reese's face cycled through a rapid sequence of emotions: confusion, disbelief, outrage, and finally a shade of crimson that suggested dangerous blood pressure. His hand shot out before his brain could catch up, fingers closing around Ward's security badge and ripping it from her coveralls with enough force to tear the fabric. "You arrogant little—" He caught himself, jaw working, veins standing out on his temples. "Higher than mine? You're a technical specialist in 3rd class. You're nothing. You're below nothing." He held up the badge, examining it as if it might reveal secrets. "And you just made the biggest mistake of your very short naval career." Ward watched him, patient, still, a statue carved from ice and waiting. "Guards!" The 2 aides stepped forward, uncertainty written across their faces. Insubordination was one thing. Actually arresting someone required paperwork, required reasons, required a chain of events that would hold up to scrutiny. "Take her credentials," Reese ordered. "All of them. I want her confined to quarters pending a full investigation into how she got aboard my ship and what she's really doing here." He stepped close enough that Ward could count the broken capillaries in his nose. "You think you can waltz onto my vessel, play dress-up with that pretty face, and talk to me like I'm some junior petty officer? I've been running ships since before you were born, and no foreign-looking infiltrator with delusions of grandeur is going to—" "I understand, Admiral." The interruption stopped him cold. "What?" "I said I understand." Ward's voice remained level, almost pleasant, as if they were discussing the weather rather than her impending imprisonment. "You are a man who values hierarchy, who believes that power flows from rank, and rank flows from time served. A man who sees what he expects to see." She extended her wrists. "Take me to wherever you think I belong." For a moment, Reese hesitated. This was not the reaction he had anticipated. Tears, perhaps, pleas for mercy, angry denials. Something he could use, something that would justify his suspicions and make him look like the vigilant commander protecting his ship from foreign threats. Instead, this strange woman with the frost-blue eyes was looking at him with something that might have been pity. "Get her out of my sight." The lieutenant produced a set of flex cuffs. Ward allowed herself to be restrained without resistance, her movements compliant but never submissive. As they led her toward the door, she paused, turning her head just enough to meet Reese's gaze one final time. "Admiral?" "What?" "Enjoy the next 12 hours." Her voice was soft, almost intimate. "They will be the last comfortable ones you experience for a very long time." The door closed behind her, and Admiral Vincent Reese was left standing in an empty maintenance bay with a torn security badge in his hand and a cold feeling in his chest that he could not quite name. "By the way, where are you watching this story tonight? Drop your country in the comments. I would love to know." The brig was not designed for comfort. It was designed for containment, and it accomplished this goal with the brutal efficiency of a system that had been breaking men for centuries. 4 walls of gray steel, 1 cot bolted to the floor, a toilet that had seen better decades, a single fluorescent light that flickered at irregular intervals, a psychological irritant that most prisoners found maddening within the first hour. Ward found it useful. She sat on the cot's edge, spine straight, hands resting on her knees, counting flickers and breathing in the 4-count pattern that had become as natural as her heartbeat. Each flicker was approximately 1.7 seconds apart, inconsistent enough to be annoying, consistent enough to serve as a rough timer. 1 flicker, 2 flicker, 3 flicker, 4. The guards had not bothered to search her properly. Why would they? She was a technical specialist, nobody, a decorative anomaly that had talked back to the wrong person and was now being taught a lesson about hierarchy and respect. They had taken her badge, her toolkit, and her dignity, and they believed that was enough. They were wrong. Ward raised her left wrist, examining the simple digital watch that remained strapped there. Standard issue, unremarkable, the kind of timepiece that 1,000 sailors wore, and nobody noticed. She pressed her thumbnail against a specific point on the watch face, held it for exactly 3 seconds, and felt the subtle vibration that indicated successful activation. The display shifted from pale green to deep red. Ghost protocol active. She allowed herself a single exhale and closed her eyes. 3 years, 7 months, 16 days. That was how long she had been hunting. 3 years of false leads and dead ends. 7 months of building covers and establishing legends. 16 days aboard this floating city, playing the role of the forgettable technician, while she mapped patrol routes and memorized access codes and waited for the moment when she could finally do what she had come to do. The moment was now. In her mind, the mission parameters surfaced with crystalline clarity. Primary objective: obtain evidence of Admiral Vincent Reese's involvement in the sale of classified intelligence to hostile foreign actors. Secondary objective: prevent the compromise of SEAL Team 6's upcoming operation in Syrian territory. Tertiary objective: extract without revealing identity or true capability. Acceptable casualties: 0. Time remaining: 11 hours and 43 minutes. Ward opened her eyes. The lights in the corridor outside had dimmed, signaling the transition to night shift. Fewer guards, longer patrol intervals. She had memorized the schedule within her first 48 hours aboard, had noted which personnel took their responsibilities seriously, and which ones used the quiet hours to catch unauthorized naps in storage compartments. The ventilation grate above the toilet was secured by 4 screws that had not been properly tightened since the ship's last maintenance overhaul. Ward had noticed this on her first inspection of the brig, had filed the information away in the mental catalog where she stored every potential advantage, every possible escape route, every vulnerability that might someday mean the difference between success and failure. Today, it meant everything. She rose from the cot in a single fluid motion and crossed to the toilet. The metal seat was cold beneath her feet as she climbed onto it, reaching up to trace the edges of the grate with practiced fingers. The first screw turned with minimal resistance. The second required slightly more pressure. The third and fourth came free in quick succession. 3 minutes after she began, Ward was inside the ventilation system. The space was cramped, dark, and filthy, with years of accumulated dust and mechanical residue. The air tasted of recycled breath and metal, and the particular staleness of spaces that never saw sunlight. Ward moved through it like water, her slender frame an advantage for once, her shoulders barely brushing the walls as she navigated by memory and touch. 14 feet forward, left turn at the junction, 22 feet along the main trunk, down 1 level via the maintenance ladder, right turn at the secondary junction, 8 feet to the access panel. She emerged into a service corridor that most of the ship's crew did not know existed. These passages honeycombed the Constellation's infrastructure, used by maintenance crews during off hours and forgotten by everyone else. They were rarely patrolled, barely monitored, and invisible to anyone who had not spent 6 weeks studying the vessel's blueprints with the obsessive attention of someone whose life depended on knowing every shadow. Ward's life depended on it. She moved through the corridors like a ghost, her footsteps silent, her breathing controlled, every sense alert for the approach of unexpected personnel. The route to Admiral Reese's office was 3 levels up and 200 feet forward, a journey that would take her through some of the most heavily trafficked areas of the ship. At this hour, 2:15 a.m., those areas were deserted. Ward reached the office door at 2:47 a.m., ahead of schedule. She paused in the shadows, listening. The corridor was silent. The hum of the ship's systems was steady and uninterrupted. The lock was a standard magnetic seal, military grade but not exceptional. Ward produced a small device from a pocket sewn into the inner lining of her coveralls, a pocket the guards had not found because they had not known to look for it. The device was roughly the size of a credit card, its surface matte black and featureless. She pressed it against the lock mechanism and waited. 3 seconds. 4, 5. The lock clicked open. Inside, Reese's office was a shrine to ego. Awards lined the walls in chronological order, each one framed and spotlit as if they were artifacts in a museum. Photographs showed him shaking hands with politicians, admirals, foreign dignitaries, his smile identical in every image, broad, confident, the smile of a man who believed he had earned his place at the top and never questioned how he got there. A massive oak desk dominated the center of the room, its surface bare except for a brass nameplate and a crystal paperweight in the shape of an anchor. Ward ignored all of it. Her attention was focused on the computer terminal tucked into the corner, its screen dark, but its hard drive humming with secrets. She crossed the room in 4 strides, settled into the chair, and began. Her fingers moved across the tactical keyboard, military-grade encryption software loading in seconds, the kind of precision equipment that separates operators from amateurs. The first layer of security fell in 90 seconds. Username and password, both predictable. Reese had used his wife's maiden name combined with their anniversary date, a combination so common among high-ranking officers that it barely qualified as protection. Ward had obtained the information during her first week aboard, a casual conversation with a personnel clerk who had no idea he was being interrogated. The second layer was more challenging. Biometric verification, fingerprint and retinal scan required. But Ward had prepared for this too. She reached into another concealed pocket and produced a small, transparent sheet covered in a pattern of ridges and whorls. Reese's fingerprint, lifted from the glass of water he had set down during a briefing 3 days ago. The retinal scan was trickier, but she had noticed that Reese had logged into this terminal at 9:17 p.m. according to the system logs, and that the session had not been properly closed. 1 keystroke later, she was in. The files appeared on the screen like a confession written in fluorescent light. Encrypted communications with foreign agents, the encryption strong but not strong enough. Bank account numbers in the Cayman Islands, the transfers regular and substantial. Contact lists featuring names that would make any intelligence analyst's blood run cold. And there, buried beneath layers of misdirection and false trails, the document that made Ward's heart stop. Operation Sandstorm, SEAL Team 6. She opened the file with hands that did not tremble, because trembling was a luxury she could not afford. The content spilled across the screen in neat lines of text that represented the deaths of men she knew. Deployment coordinates, extraction timeline, personnel roster, patrol routes, safe house locations. All of it was sold to a mercenary organization with verified ties to 3 different international terror networks. Ward stared at the screen, and for one moment, just one, she allowed the mask to slip. Beneath the composed exterior, beneath the training and the discipline and the years of learning to feel nothing, rage burned like a star going supernova. Her brothers, her family. The men and women who had trained beside her, bled beside her, held the line when everything else was falling apart. Reese had sold them for profit, had marked them for slaughter, and pocketed the payment like it was a business transaction. The photograph in her pocket seemed to pulse against her heart. Ward closed her eyes, counted to 4, and opened them again. The rage was still there, but it was controlled now, channeled into the cold precision that had kept her alive through situations that should have killed her a dozen times over. She began copying files. The download would take 7 minutes. 7 minutes during which she was exposed, vulnerable, trapped in the office of a man who would not hesitate to destroy her if he discovered what she was doing. 6 minutes. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, initiating secondary protocols. The satellite redirect was the priority. If she could change the coordinates that had been transmitted to the mercenary team, SEAL Team 6 would deploy to a location the enemy did not know. They would complete their mission. They would survive. 5 minutes. The screen flickered briefly, and Ward's breath caught before she recognized it as a normal system fluctuation. The download continued. 4 minutes. Somewhere in the distance, a door closed. Ward's ears strained for any sound of approach, any indication that she had been discovered. The corridor remained silent. 3 minutes. The satellite redirect was uploaded. New coordinates replacing the ones Reese had sold. Empty desert instead of an ambush site. Sand and wind instead of bullets and blood. 2 minutes. The download bar crept toward completion. 92%, 95, 98, 1 minute. Ward's finger hovered over the execute command for the final protocol, the one that would encrypt her trail and erase any evidence of her intrusion. 30 seconds. The download completed. The redirect was uploaded. The evidence was secured. Ward pressed the key. The lights came on. Not gradually, not with any warning, but all at once, flooding the office with blinding fluorescence. Ward's hand was already moving, reaching for the drive, preparing to run, when the door slammed open and the room filled with uniforms. Admiral Reese stood in the doorway. He was wearing a robe over his pajamas, his silver hair disheveled, his feet in slippers that looked absurdly casual against the polished deck. But his smile was sharp as a blade, and his eyes glittered with triumph. I knew it. Behind him, 4 military police officers fanned out, weapons drawn, faces grim. They moved with professional efficiency, covering the exits, establishing lines of fire. Ward did not move. I knew you were too good to be true, Reese continued, stepping into the room. His voice was rich with satisfaction. The pretty face, the mysterious background, the way you looked at me like you knew something I didn't. He stopped a few feet away, looking down at her with unconcealed contempt. Did you really think you could break into my office and I wouldn't know? Ward's expression remained neutral. How? Silent alarms. Reese gestured toward the computer terminal. Every system in this room is wired to my personal quarters. The moment you touched that keyboard, I knew. He leaned closer. So, the Russian doll is a spy after all. I should have trusted my instincts from the beginning. You should have trusted many things. Ward's voice was calm, conversational, as if they were discussing the weather. Your instincts, unfortunately, are not among them. Reese's smile flickered. Take her. The MPs surged forward. Ward allowed them to drag her from the chair without resistance, her wrists twisted behind her back and secured with metal restraints that bit into her flesh. One of the officers noticed the watch on her wrist and reached for it. Leave it. Reese's voice cracked like a whip. I want forensics to examine everything she has. Every piece of equipment, every scrap of fabric. I want to know who sent her and what she was after. The officer stepped back. They marched her toward the door, but as she passed Reese, Ward leaned close enough that only he could hear. The files have already been transmitted, she whispered. The coordinates have already been changed. Whatever you sold, Admiral, the buyers will never receive. Reese's face went pale. You're lying. Ward smiled. It was a small expression, barely a curve of the lips, but something in it made Admiral Vincent Reese take an involuntary step backward. Enjoy the next few hours, Admiral. Savor them, because when the sun comes up, everything you've built will burn. She held his gaze, her ice blue eyes reflecting nothing but certainty. And I will be the one holding the match. Get her out of here. They dragged her through the door and into the corridor beyond, and Admiral Reese was left standing in his violated office with the taste of fear on his tongue and the growing suspicion that he had just made the worst mistake of his life. The cell they chose this time was different, deeper in the ship, darker. The kind of space reserved for prisoners too dangerous for the standard brig, the ones whose crimes warranted isolation, and whose presence made even hardened guards nervous. Ward sat in its center, cross-legged on the cold metal floor, and counted her breathing. 1, 2, 3, 4. The download had completed before they pulled her away. The satellite redirect had been sent. Whatever evidence remained on Reese's computer would be more than enough to hang him, but, more importantly, SEAL Team 6 would survive. They would deploy to coordinates the enemy did not know. They would complete their mission and come home alive. That was what mattered. Everything else was simply procedure. The hours passed slowly in the darkness. Ward did not sleep. Sleep was a luxury she had learned to do without, a weakness that could be exploited by those who knew how to watch and wait. Instead, she meditated, conserving energy, preparing her body and mind for whatever came next. At some point, she heard voices in the corridor, raised, agitated. Something had changed in the ship's routine, though she could not determine what. Dawn came eventually, gray light seeping through the ventilation grate above her head. Ward rose from her position on the floor, stretched muscles that had stiffened during the long night, and turned to face the door. It opened at 6:45 a.m. The guards who entered were different from the ones who had locked her away. Their faces were harder, their movements more controlled. They were not standard brig personnel. They were an escort detail. Full combat gear, 6 men for 1 prisoner. Ward allowed herself to be shackled without comment. Wrists, ankles, a chain connecting the two that forced her to shuffle rather than walk. They led her out of the cell and into the corridor, and the parade of shame began. The route they chose was not the most direct path to wherever they were taking her. It wound through mess halls and common areas, past duty stations and recreation rooms, ensuring that the maximum number of personnel would witness her disgrace. Word had spread. Sailors paused in their duties to stare. Conversations died as she passed, replaced by whispers that followed her like shadows. Spy, traitor, knew there was something wrong with her. Pretty face, ugly soul. Should space her and be done with it. Ward walked with her head high, her spine straight, her expression revealing nothing of the storm beneath. She had been through worse. She had endured interrogations that made this public humiliation look like a gentle reprimand. She had faced death in forms that these sailors could not imagine and never flinched. But this was different. This was the weight of being seen as the enemy by the very people she had sacrificed everything to protect. These men and women, these sailors who called her traitor and spy, had no idea that she had just saved their brothers, had no idea that the information she had stolen would prevent an ambush that would have claimed 37 American lives. They saw only the surface, the strange woman, the foreign features, the outsider who had dared to challenge their commanding officer. A young seaman, barely out of training, stepped into her path. His face was twisted with righteous anger. "My brother's in SEAL Team 6, he said, his voice shaking. "If anything happens to him because of you, nothing will happen to your brother." Ward's voice was quiet, certain. "I give you my word." The seaman spat at her feet. The guards shoved him aside and continued forward, and Ward added his face to the catalog of debts she would someday repay. They reached the main briefing room at 7:15 a.m. It was the largest space on the vessel, designed to accommodate several hundred personnel for major announcements and operational briefings. The room could hold 200 bodies comfortably, 300 if they stood along the walls. Today, it was packed. SEALs in their distinctive uniforms lined the perimeter, arms crossed, faces hard. Support staff filled the rows of folding chairs that had been set up in neat lines. Officers clustered near the front, their expressions ranging from grim satisfaction to barely concealed excitement. And there, on the raised platform at the room's center, Admiral Vincent Reese stood like a conquering emperor preparing to address his subjects. He had dressed for the occasion. Full-service uniform, every metal polished, every crease sharp enough to cut. His silver hair was swept back with parade ground precision, and his smile was the smile of a man who believed he had already won. The guards led Ward to the center of the room, forcing her to stand in the open space before the platform. Every eye in the briefing room was fixed on her. Every face reflected the same emotion, contempt. "Brothers and sisters of the Constellation," Reese's voice carried easily through the silent room, amplified by training and natural authority. "I stand before you today to address a threat to our security, our mission, and our honor. A threat that walked among us in disguise, wearing the face of an ally, while serving the interests of our enemies." He paused, letting the words sink in. "This woman," he continued, gesturing toward Ward, "was apprehended last night, attempting to access classified information from my personal terminal. Analysis of her activities has revealed patterns consistent with foreign intelligence operations. Her background is fabricated. Her loyalties are compromised. She is, in short, a spy." Gasps rippled through the crowd, muttered curses. The sound of 300 people shifting in their seats, united in their outrage. "I know many of you noticed her from the beginning. Her strange appearance, her unexplained presence, her arrogant disregard for the chain of command." Reese's smile widened. "You should trust your instincts, sailors. When something looks wrong, when something feels wrong, it usually is wrong." He stepped to the edge of the platform, looking down at Ward with unconcealed satisfaction. "The evidence against her is overwhelming, and I assure you, she will face the full consequences of her actions. But I wanted you all to see her first, to understand that vigilance is our first line of defense. That suspicion of outsiders is not prejudice but prudence." He raised his voice, letting it ring through the chamber. "This is what happens to those who betray the United States Navy." The crowd roared its approval. Ward stood motionless in the center of that storm, her expression carved from stone, her ice-blue eyes fixed on a point somewhere beyond Reese, beyond the room, beyond this moment entirely. She was counting. 1, 2, 3, 4. If you are still here at this point, you have walked every step with Ward through the darkness. Leave a fire emoji in the comments if you are ready for her moment. Reese was speaking again, his voice rising with theatrical passion. He was describing her crimes in lurid detail, embellishing where necessary, painting a picture of foreign conspiracy and domestic treachery that had every person in the room hanging on his words. He was enjoying himself. He had no idea what was coming. Ward heard it first, a distant sound, barely audible over Reese's oratory, footsteps, many of them, moving with a precision that spoke of training beyond anything the standard personnel aboard this vessel possessed. The doors at the back of the briefing room were reinforced steel, designed to withstand significant force. They swung open now with the ease of paper curtains, pushed by men whose very presence seemed to reshape the air around them. The first thing Ward noticed was the silence. It fell over the crowd like a physical weight, 300 voices dying mid-word as heads turned toward the new arrivals. Even Reese faltered, his carefully rehearsed speech stumbling to a halt. What in the... The man who walked down the center aisle moved like something carved from legend. His service-dress blue uniform was immaculate, not the carefully maintained cleanliness of an officer who cared about appearances, but the absolute perfection of one who understood that appearance was merely an extension of purpose. Medals covered his chest in rows that told stories of wars fought across 5 decades. His face was weathered, lined by time and responsibility, but his eyes were sharp as surgical steel. 4 stars gleamed on his shoulders. Fleet Admiral Harrison Moore, commander of the Pacific Fleet. Behind him walked 6 men in suits that screamed federal authority, their faces as blank and hard as unmarked tombstones. The crowd parted before them like water before the bow of a ship, chairs scraping, bodies pressing backward. Reese had gone very pale. "Admiral Moore," he managed, his voice cracking slightly. "Sir, I wasn't informed you would be..." Moore walked past him without acknowledgement, past the platform, past the stunned officers, past the rows of sailors who were scrambling to their feet, years of training overriding their confusion. He walked directly to where Ward stood in chains, and stopped. For a long moment, the Fleet Admiral simply looked at her, taking in the restraints, the torn uniform, the bruises forming on her wrists where the metal shackles had bitten too deep, the dignified stillness of a woman who had been dragged through public humiliation and refused to break. The briefing room was absolutely silent. 300 people held their breath. And then, with a precision that spoke of 40 years of military service, Fleet Admiral Harrison Moore raised his hand in a salute. Not a casual gesture, not a quick acknowledgement between colleagues. A full ceremonial salute, held with parade ground exactness, the kind of salute reserved for fallen heroes and heads of state. The room gasped as one. Ward straightened her spine, lifted her chin, and despite the chains that bound her wrists and ankles, returned the salute with perfect form. The effect rippled outward like a shockwave. The seals along the walls were the first to respond. These were men who had been glaring at Ward moments before, who had called her a spy and traitor in the mess halls and corridors of this ship. Now their hands rose in unison, snapping to their foreheads in the crisp salute of elite operators acknowledging one of their own. The officers followed, then the enlisted personnel. Within 30 seconds, every person in the briefing room was at attention, saluting a woman in chains who had just been accused of treason. Every person except one. Admiral Vincent Reese stood frozen on his platform, his face cycling through shades of white and gray, his carefully constructed world crumbling around him like a sandcastle before the tide. "Sir," his voice was barely a whisper, "I don't understand. This woman is a spy. She broke into my office. She accessed classified files. I have evidence." Moore's voice cut through the room like a blade. "You have nothing." And in that moment, as the word nothing echoed off the steel walls of the briefing room, Ward allowed herself one small breath. 1, 2, 3, 4. The hunt was not over, but the trap had finally sprung. The silence that followed Moore's words was absolute. 300 sailors stood frozen in their salutes, arms locked, eyes forward, their minds struggling to reconcile what they were witnessing. The woman they had called a traitor, the woman they had spat upon, the woman in chains. She was being saluted by the most powerful naval officer in the Pacific. Moore let the moment stretch, let the weight of it press down upon every soul in that room. Then he turned, slowly, deliberately, and faced Admiral Vincent Reese. "Do you know who this woman is?" Reese's mouth opened, closed. It opened again. He looked like a man drowning in air, grasping for words that refused to come. She said she was from Virginia. Her name," Moore continued, his voice carrying the quiet thunder of absolute authority, "is Lieutenant Commander Elise Ward, graduate of the United States Naval Academy, class valedictorian, recipient of the Navy Cross for actions in Afghanistan that remain classified above your clearance level, 2 Bronze Stars, a Purple Heart she never talks about." The room seemed to contract around his words. "She is the commanding officer of a unit that does not officially exist, engaged in operations that will never appear in any official record." Moore took one step toward Reese, then another. "For the past 3 years, she has been tracking a high-ranking naval officer suspected of selling classified intelligence to foreign powers." Reese backed away until his shoulders hit the podium behind him. "That officer," Moore said softly, "is you." The word hung in the air like a blade waiting to fall. "No." Reese shook his head, the motion frantic, desperate. "No, that's impossible. This is a setup. She's the spy. Look at her. Look at her face. She's obviously not—" "Not what, Admiral?" The voice came from behind Moore, and every head in the room turned toward its source. Ward had not moved from her position in the center of the room. The chains still bound her wrists and ankles, but something had changed in her bearing, a subtle shift that transformed her from prisoner to predator. When she spoke again, her voice carried the quiet confidence of someone who had already won. "Not American enough, not ordinary enough." She tilted her head, and the morning light caught the angular planes of her features, the aristocratic set of her jaw that had made Reese so certain she was foreign. "You looked at me and saw what you expected to see. A decoration, an outsider, a woman who could not possibly be a threat." She took one shuffling step forward, the chains clinking against the deck. "I counted on that." Moore gestured to the men in suits who had accompanied him. 2 of them moved forward, producing keys and removing Ward's restraints with practiced efficiency. She rubbed her wrists where the metal had bitten deep, rolling her shoulders, reclaiming her body from the constraints that had been imposed upon it. When she straightened, she seemed taller somehow, more solid, as if the removal of the chains had allowed her to expand into her true dimensions. "The evidence was transmitted via secure satellite uplink at 0317 this morning," she said, her eyes never leaving Reese's face. "Bank records showing deposits totaling $4.7 million over the past 18 months. Communication logs with known foreign intelligence assets. Transfer protocols for Operation Sandstorm." She paused, letting each word land like a hammer blow. "SEAL Team 6 deployed at 0600. They are alive because I changed the coordinates you sold to our enemies. 37 men and women who will go home to their families because you failed." Reese's face had gone the color of old paper. This is entrapment. You can't." "I can." Ward stepped closer, close enough that he could see the gold flecks in her ice-blue eyes. "I did, and now everyone in this room knows exactly what kind of man you are." She leaned in, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the silent briefing room. "I told you, Admiral, my rank is higher than yours." Moore nodded to the federal agents. "Take him." They moved with the efficiency of men who had performed this action many times before. Reese did not resist as they took his arms, as they turned him away from the platform he had stood upon with such confidence mere minutes ago. But as they led him toward the door, something broke inside him, and the words came spilling out in a desperate flood. "You don't understand. I'm not the only one. There are others, people higher than me, people you can't touch. If you think this ends with me, it doesn't end with you," Ward said quietly. "It begins with you." The doors closed behind him, and Admiral Vincent Reese was gone. The briefing room remained frozen for a long moment, 300 people struggling to process the complete inversion of everything they had believed. The spy was a hero. The Admiral was a traitor. The world had turned upside down while they watched. Moore cleared his throat. "At ease." The salutes dropped, bodies relaxed, but no one spoke. No one seemed to know what to say. "Ladies and gentlemen," Moore continued, his voice settling into the measured cadence of official address. What you have witnessed today is the conclusion of a classified counterintelligence operation. You will all be debriefed on what you can and cannot discuss regarding these events. For now, return to your duties. The United States Navy continues to operate regardless of the failures of individual officers. The crowd began to disperse, slowly at first, then with increasing purpose. But many paused as they passed Ward, their expressions complicated landscapes of emotion, embarrassment, shame, grudging respect, the recognition of their own failure to see beyond the surface. A burly chief petty officer with a face like carved granite stopped directly in front of her. Ward recognized him as one of the SEALs who had lined the walls, one of the men who had glared at her with unconcealed hostility. For a moment, he simply looked at her. Then he snapped to attention and delivered a salute so crisp it could have been used as a training example. "Ma'am, I owe you an apology. We all do." Ward's expression softened, just slightly. "You believed what you were told by someone you trusted, Chief. That's not a character flaw. That's loyalty." She returned his salute with equal precision. The failure was his, not yours. The chief held the position for a long moment before dropping it and moving on. Others followed his example. One by one, the sailors who had called her traitor and spy paused to offer small acknowledgments. A nod, a murmured word, a salute held a heartbeat longer than regulation required. Ward accepted each one with quiet grace. The young seaman who had stepped into her path earlier, the one whose brother served in SEAL Team 6, was among the last to approach. His face was red, his eyes bright with something that might have been tears or might have been shame. "Ma'am, his voice cracked. "What I said earlier, what I did, I'm so sorry. My brother, your brother is alive," Ward said gently. "He's completing his mission as we speak, and he'll come home to you because that's what we do. We protect each other, even when we don't know we're being protected." The seaman's composure broke completely. He snapped a salute that was more emotion than form, then turned and walked quickly toward the exit, his shoulders shaking. Ward watched him go. When the room had finally emptied, leaving only Moore and his entourage, the fleet admiral approached her with something that might have been a smile on his weathered face. "That was dramatic." "You told me to be convincing, sir." "I told you to be careful. There's a difference." He studied her face, noting the exhaustion hidden beneath the composure, the shadows under her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and constant vigilance. "When's the last time you actually slept?" "I'll sleep when the mission is complete." "The mission is complete. Reese is in custody. The evidence is secure. SEAL Team 6 is operational and uncompromised." Moore shook his head. "You've done enough, Ward. More than enough. More than anyone should have to do." Ward was quiet for a moment, her gaze drifting toward the door through which Reese had been led. "He wasn't working alone, sir." "I know. The communications we recovered reference a network, other officers, other agencies. He was just one node in something much larger." Her voice hardened almost imperceptibly. "We've cut off a finger. The hand is still out there. I know that too." Moore's expression matched hers, granite meeting ice. "Which is why we're not done, not by a long distance." He reached into his jacket and produced a slim folder, unmarked and unremarkable. Ward took it, feeling the weight of whatever it contained. "What's this?" "Your next assignment, not immediately," he added, holding up a hand. "You're being transferred to JSOC headquarters first. 3 weeks of mandatory downtime, debriefing, medical evaluation, and some time to remember what it feels like to be a human being instead of a ghost." Ward opened her mouth to protest. "That's not a suggestion, Commander. That's an order." Moore's voice softened slightly. "You've been running on fumes and willpower for 3 years. Even the best operators need to refuel. Take the time. Use it, because what comes next—" He trailed off, looking toward the windows where the morning sun was painting the Pacific in shades of gold and amber. "What comes next will require everything you have." Ward considered the folder in her hands. 3 weeks. It was an eternity by her standards. A lifetime of stillness in a career that had been nothing but motion since the day she first put on the uniform. But Moore was right. She could feel the exhaustion in her bones, the accumulated weight of years spent hunting shadows. And if the network was as extensive as she suspected, she would need to be at full capacity when she went after them. "Yes, sir." Moore nodded, satisfied. "There's a helicopter waiting on the flight deck. My aide will handle your transfer paperwork." He paused at the door, looking back. "Commander, sir, that line you used on Reese, about your rank being higher than his." A rare smile crossed his weathered brow. "How long were you waiting to say that?" Ward allowed herself a small smile in return. 3 years, 7 months, and 16 days, sir. Worth the wait?" She thought about the photograph in her pocket. 6 faces, 5 graves. 1 traitor who would never hurt anyone again. Every second of it. Moore nodded once more, then stepped through the door and was gone. Her service record would need updating after this operation. Military documentation, benefits paperwork, the administrative machinery that keeps the armed forces running. 89% of special operations personnel report that proper documentation made the difference in their post-service transitions. Ward stood alone in the empty briefing room for a long moment, letting the silence wash over her. The space that had been filled with hostility and accusation was peaceful now, just another compartment in a floating city that would continue its mission regardless of the dramas that played out within its walls. She walked to the window and looked out at the ocean. Somewhere out there, SEAL Team 6 was completing their operation. 37 men and women who had no idea how close they had come to annihilation. They would never know her name, would never know that a woman they had never met had risked everything to keep them alive. That was how it was supposed to be. Ghosts did not seek recognition. They sought results. Ward touched the window glass, feeling the coolness against her fingertips. The sun was fully up now, burning away the morning haze, transforming the Pacific into a sheet of hammered gold. It was beautiful in a way that she rarely allowed herself to notice, consumed as she usually was by operational details and threat assessments and the endless calculation of risk. But today, just for a moment, she let herself see it, let herself feel it, let herself remember that there was more to life than hunting and being hunted. The moment passed. Ward turned from the window and walked out of the briefing room, her footsteps echoing in the empty corridor. The route to the flight deck was familiar now, mapped in her memory alongside 100 other routes on 100 other vessels in 100 other operations. She passed sailors who stepped aside with newfound respect, their eyes following her with a mixture of awe and uncertainty. Word had spread quickly, as it always did in enclosed spaces. The spy who was not a spy. The prisoner who was a commander. The beautiful stranger who had saved their brothers. Ward ignored them all. The flight deck was bright with morning sun, the wind carrying the salt spray scent of open ocean. A Black Hawk helicopter sat waiting, its rotors beginning their slow rotation as pilots completed pre-flight checks. The sound built gradually, a mechanical heartbeat that would carry her away from this ship and toward whatever came next. Moore's aide was waiting by the helicopter, a young lieutenant with earnest eyes and a tablet computer clutched to his chest. "Commander Ward, your transport is ready. We have a 3-hour flight to Pearl Harbor, then a connecting flight to the mainland." He consulted his tablet. "Your quarters at JSOC have been prepared. Is there anything you need before we depart?" Ward considered the question. There were many things she needed. Sleep, food, time to process everything that had happened, time to grieve for the brothers she had lost, and celebrate the ones she had saved. But those needs could wait. "No, Lieutenant, let's go." She climbed into the helicopter, settling into the jump seat with the ease of someone who had made this journey countless times before. The crew chief handed her a headset, and she put it on, adjusting the microphone. "Commander," the pilot's voice crackled through the headset. "We're cleared for takeoff. Flight time to Pearl is approximately 2 hours 45 minutes. Weather looks good the whole way." "Understood." The rotors accelerated, building from a whisper to a roar, and the helicopter lifted off the deck in a smooth surge of power. Ward watched through the window as the constellation shrank below her, becoming first a toy and then a speck and then nothing at all against the vastness of the Pacific. She reached into her pocket and withdrew the photograph. 6 faces smiled up at her, frozen in a moment of joy that had ended long ago. She traced each one with her fingertip, remembering. Jackson, who had taught her to shoot, Martinez, who had taught her to fight, Chen, who had taught her to hack, Williams, who had taught her to lead, Thompson, who had taught her to survive, and Reese, who had taught her that the enemy was not always wearing a foreign uniform, that betrayal could wear a familiar face, that the greatest threats sometimes came from within. She had hunted him for 3 years, 7 months, and 16 days. She had found him. She had destroyed him. But as she looked at the photograph, at the faces of her fallen brothers, she knew that justice had not truly been served. Not yet. Not while the network that had corrupted Reese still operated in the shadows. Not while other traitors walked the halls of power, selling secrets and lives for profit. The folder Moore had given her sat heavy in her lap. Ward opened it, scanning the contents with practiced speed. Names, locations, patterns of communication that suggested a web far more extensive than anything they had previously suspected. The network reached into every branch of the military, every intelligence agency, every level of government. Reese had been a finger. The hand reached everywhere. Ward closed the folder and looked out the window at the endless blue stretching toward the horizon. Somewhere out there, other traitors were sleeping soundly, confident that their secrets were safe. Somewhere out there, other operations were being compromised. Other lives were being sold. They had no idea what was coming for them. 3 weeks. Moore had given her 3 weeks to rest, to recover, to remember what it felt like to be human. She would use them. She would sleep. She would eat. She would let her body heal from the accumulated damage of 3 years spent hunting in the shadows. And when the 3 weeks were over, she would begin again. 1 node down, many more to go. The helicopter banked toward the rising sun, carrying her away from one chapter and toward the next. Ward closed her eyes, letting the rhythm of the rotors wash over her, and allowed herself to drift. In her dreams, she walked through corridors of light and shadow, hunting enemies who wore familiar faces. In her dreams, the photograph in her pocket came alive, and her brothers walked beside her, their voices encouraging, their presence a comfort she had denied herself for too long. In her dreams, she was not alone, but dreams were temporary things, and the mission was forever. When she woke, she would begin planning the next operation, the next target, the next step in the long campaign to root out the corruption that had killed her brothers and threatened everything she had sworn to protect. The network did not know her name, did not know her face, did not know that the woman with the porcelain skin and the ice-blue eyes had just declared war on everything they had built. They would learn. They would all learn. Ward opened her eyes as the helicopter began its descent toward Pearl Harbor. Below, the base spread out in ordered rows of buildings and runways, a testament to American power and presence in the Pacific. It looked peaceful from up here, orderly, safe. She knew better. Safety was an illusion. Order was a fiction. The only constant was the endless struggle between those who protected and those who betrayed. She had chosen her side long ago, and she would fight until there was nothing left to fight for, or nothing left of her to give. The helicopter touched down with barely a bump, and Ward removed her headset, preparing to disembark. The crew chief slid the door open, admitting a rush of warm Hawaiian air that carried the scent of flowers and jet fuel. She stepped out onto the tarmac. Moore's aide was already there, tablet in hand, ready to shepherd her through the administrative machinery that awaited. But Ward paused before following him, turning to look back at the helicopter that had carried her from one world to another. The pilot gave her a thumbs up through the cockpit glass. She returned the gesture, then turned and walked toward the buildings ahead. Behind her, the helicopter's rotors wound down into silence. Above her, the sun continued its arc across the Hawaiian sky. And somewhere in the shadows she could not yet see, the network that had created Vincent Reese was already moving, already adapting, already preparing for threats they did not yet fully understand. They should have been afraid. Ward walked through the doors of the JSOC liaison office, and the next chapter of her war began. The woman with the face of an angel and the skills of a ghost had come home. But home, she knew, was just another word for the place where you prepared for the next battle. And the next battle was already waiting. If Ward's journey moved you, hit like and subscribe for more. The thanks button helps us bring you stories like this. 3 weeks later, Ward stood at the window of her temporary quarters at JSOC headquarters, watching the Virginia sunset paint the sky in shades of blood and gold. The folder Moore had given her lay open on the desk behind her, its contents now memorized, its implications still unfolding in her mind. 17 names, 12 agencies, a network that stretched from the Pentagon to foreign capitals she had never visited, but would soon come to know intimately. Reese had been the beginning. The end was nowhere in sight. Her phone buzzed once, a secure line, encrypted beyond anything commercially available. She glanced at the screen. Sandstorm complete. All operators, RTB, 0 casualties. Ward allowed herself a small smile. 37 lives. 37 families who would welcome their loved ones home. 37 reasons why everything she had sacrificed meant something. The smile faded as quickly as it had come. She turned back to the window, watching her reflection superimposed against the darkening sky. The woman who looked back at her was familiar and strange all at once. The porcelain skin, the ice-blue eyes, the face that had fooled admirals and analysts and everyone who had ever underestimated her. A weapon disguised as a work of art. The phone buzzed again. New intel. Priority Alpha. Report to Moore 0600. 3 weeks had become 3 days. The rest she had been promised was already ending, consumed by the insatiable hunger of a mission that would not wait. Ward did not mind. Rest was for people who had finished their work. Her work was just beginning. She picked up the photograph from her nightstand, looking one last time at the 6 faces frozen in eternal youth. 5 graves, 1 traitor in custody, and somewhere in the shadows, others who had not yet learned to fear her name. They would learn. Ward tucked the photograph into her jacket, close to her heart, and began preparing for tomorrow. The ghost was going hunting again, and this time she would not stop until every last traitor had been dragged into the light.